Hello everyone, welcome to my video. So this is a kind of new setting and it's a bit echoey, so hopefully the sound quality will be fine. But anyway, so today I'm going to review this book, so Japanese for Busy People, book 1, the Kana version. And I've been wanting to do this video for a long time, but I was waiting to complete the book entirely so I could give an honest opinion and a sort of overview of the entire book, because I like to review things properly. So in this review there will be 3 parts. So the first part will be an introduction to the book, so you sort of know what kind of book it is and what to expect. Then the second part will be a sort of explanation of the structure of the book. And finally I will tell you what I thought was good and bad about the book and just give you sort of my opinion on the book. So let's start with the introduction, and just so you know, if I look down, that's because I'm looking at my notes under the camera. But anyway, so Japanese for Busy People Book 1 is essentially a book series which focuses on business Japanese. Although I still think that the first book, at least, I can't really comment on the other books in the series, the first book is still fine for all beginners because it focuses on the basic grammar of Japanese and basic vocabulary. And I think all the content in the book includes all the things you really need to get started with Japanese at beginner level. Just so you know, the type of Japanese included in the book is polite Japanese or formal Japanese, which is different from informal or casual Japanese in terms of grammar and vocab. And the book aims to teach you about daily situations such as counting, asking your way around, doing shopping, making a reservation at a restaurant, etc., etc. In a nutshell, at the end of the textbook, you should have functional knowledge of Japanese and also a good understanding of basic sentence structure in Japanese. So now let's move on to the general structure of the book, and I will show you also a few pages so you can have an idea of what the book looks like. First of all, the book has 25 lessons which are divided in 10 units. Each unit focuses on teaching you a certain number of grammar concepts and vocabulary which you will be practicing across the 2 or 3 lessons contained in each unit. So let's look at an example. So the first part of each unit usually includes some sort of cultural notes. Hopefully you can see, I'll get a bit closer as well, and it will sort of show you some text. Come on, camera, focus. Here we go, I think that'd be fine. And that's sort of a nice addition to the book. It gives you some cultural input, which is always nice, especially if you're learning Japanese, because I'm imagining that if you're learning Japanese, you're interested in the culture. And the second thing you see is a grammar explanation of what you will be learning in the unit, and it looks like this. I can't see my own camera, but yeah, it's usually a full page. And then what you have is what they call a target dialogue. So again, I will show you this one. So you've got a text. So this one is short because that's the first one, but then towards the end of the book, they are about half of the page, I guess. And then underneath, you've got some vocabulary section where they translate the keywords and the important words of the text. And then sometimes you also have some notes. So there's a lot of information around the text for each lesson. Then, if you turn the page, you move on to word power, which is essentially a section where they introduce all the vocab that you'll be covering in the lesson. So here it's countries and nationalities. Then here it's occupation. So at first it's kind of basic because it's the first lesson, but then the pages sometimes, or the section of word power is sometimes 2 or 3 pages long. And then after that, we've got exercises which look like this. Obviously I've completed them. Whoops. So there's an exercise here. Usually the exercises are 2 to 3, 4 pages long. So you've got another double page of exercises. I'm hoping I'm recording this properly. And then once you've worked through all the activities, you have a listening activity, quite a quick one, where you just listen and have to answer a question or complete a sentence. And then finally, you've got short dialogues at the end, which is again more listening activities here. And it's a way to sort of see the vocab you've learned in context and also teach you more vocab because there's always going to be new vocab in these short dialogues usually. And then that's essentially it for the structure of the lesson, and it's very constant throughout the book. You're always going to have the same structure. And then at the end of the book, you have the appendices, and it's pretty classic, pretty standard. You have a summary of the grammar concepts learned in the book. You also have answers to some of the exercises. There's also a glossary, so translation of, a sort of small dictionary of all the vocab used in the book. And yeah, that's pretty standard, really. So now let's move on to what I thought about the book, and I definitely have positives and negatives for this book. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the writing practice, which I think is great because there's a lot of opportunities in the book to practice writing the Kana. And this is actually why I do not recommend the romanized version of the book. This one is a Kana version, and it will say so on the cover, but there's also a romanized version. But I don't really see the point in you buying it, because I guess if you wanted to just learn very, basic phrases and just a couple of things to just get by, you would not go for that book series, because this one really aims to teach you grammar. But so if you use romanized version, then you're not really going to learn real Japanese, because Japanese people don't write with Latin letters, or like English letters, if you will. So I see it as pointless, but then obviously it's up to you. But I definitely recommend, if you're serious about learning Japanese, to use the Kana version of this book. Now back to the activities in the book, I think they are really good, but they are way too repetitive. I feel like 85% of the exercises are you have some sort of sentence or dialogue, and you only have to replace elements of the dialogue and then just copy and change these elements. So here's an example, hopefully you can see, but you see in the dialogue that they underlined certain words, and essentially what you have to do is to rewrite the dialogue but just change these words. So it doesn't always require a lot of thinking, and it's not challenging enough, I think. But it's still good, but I just feel like they did too much of it, and instead they should have done activities which are more challenging. So for example, requiring you to write sentences from scratch and not just copy a sentence and replace some information, but actually writing full sentences on your own, which you do sometimes, but not enough at all in my opinion. And these activities which are more challenging would be kind of easy to implement in the book. It's not really difficult to design, I think. Now the second point I wanted to make is about the listening activities, because in this textbook you have a CD, and I believe there are 99 tracks, which is quite a bit, to be fair. So I think that's definitely a good point. And the dialogues in the book are also quite long, which is nice, and they cover many everyday situations, albeit many of them will be business related, but I still think the business related scenarios are still fairly useful. And the great thing about having a dialogue and a recording associated with it is that you can practice the pronunciation. So you can, for example, listen to the dialogue, try to repeat and mimic the pronunciations. And in my opinion, I think that's one of the main advantages of having a CD with a textbook. Now, the downside, I think, of these recordings is that sometimes they're way too short. For the dialogues, they're fine. The dialogue, I think, have a nice length. But at the end of each lesson, you've got the last activity, which is a very, very short listening activity. And when I say short, it's literally 5 or 10 seconds sometimes. And I think it's way too short. It would have been nice to have more activities based on listening. For example, having a dialogue and then having some statements, and then you have to decide which ones are right or wrong. And it's not like really original in terms of the activities, but simple things sometimes go a long way to allow you to practice your listening skills a bit more. And since we're talking about the dialogues, as much as I like the dialogues because they are quite long, they include a lot of vocabulary and they give you some examples of how to say things in what situation, I think the weird thing is that the dialogues are sometimes unrelated to the vocab you're learning in the lesson. So I wrote down as an example, there was a dialogue which was about asking a colleague for samples about a product, or asking for a file about a project or whatever. And then the vocab that is taught in the lesson is about giving directions and navigating around town, which I thought was a bit weird. They really should have done a dialogue where someone was in a taxi and giving directions, or how to I don't know, call a taxi, I don't know, something like that, which would have been way more related to what's taught in the lesson, but I'm not really sure why they did that. But yeah, I thought it was a bit odd, personally. And finally, let's talk about grammar, because if you know me, if you know this channel, you know that I love grammar. I know, some people call me crazy. What can I say? But I think the grammar in the book is taught quite well overall. It's very simple, straight to the point, not overly complicated, although because I like grammar, I wish there was a bit more detail, because it's true that sometimes a grammar point is explained a little bit too vaguely, but for some people that might be okay. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't like too much grammar or is not used to grammar, because grammar, if you're not used to it, can be a little bit like maths for some people, or maths for me anyway. It's a bit too complex and too abstract. So if you're not really into grammar, I think this book is good for that. The exercises I thought worked quite well as well to practice the grammar. So as I said, they're not perfect. They are sometimes a bit too easy, and I feel like they could have done more to sort of help you drill the grammar a bit better in a more sort of challenging way. So, you know, as to make sure that it really sticks to your memory. But I think that worked quite well. You know, all the activities, all the exercises allowed you to practice the grammar, see lots of examples, which is very important. But one thing that I thought was a bit weird, and if you're a complete beginner, that might be a bit confusing for me to explain that in a short video, but I thought the way they taught the verb conjugation is a little bit strange, although I understand they did it that way to make it easier. But essentially, what I recommend, I mean, I'm a teacher in real life, and that's usually how I do it because I think that makes the most sense. So what they do is that they don't start teaching conjugation based on the dictionary form of the verb, or the infinitive form, if you will. They start from the present tense form, which at first is fine, because if you're only doing the present tense, that's okay. But then when you move on to other forms of these verbs, it's a bit confusing. It makes more sense to start from the infinitive, and then that's your starting point for conjugating most tenses, if not all. But they decided to do it differently. It might be, you know, I'm not fluent in Japanese yet, so maybe there's a reason. If you're a teacher of Japanese, or if you're fluent in Japanese, that would be interesting for you to let me know if you think that's a good idea or not. But to me, that doesn't sound like a good thing, and I feel like it forms bad habits early on. But again, it could be that there's something I'm missing. So that's it for this review. I hope you found it helpful, of course. If you have any questions, then do feel free to drop a comment. I will make sure to reply to those. Also, very important, if you like language learning related content, then do not hesitate to subscribe to my channel, as I make weekly videos on language learning. And I will see you later. Bye!